A slap that should have gone unnoticed. A victim who was supposed to stay silent. A racist cop who thought he was untouchable. But when the truth comes out, the tables turn in the most brutal way imaginable. And this time, the system won't be protecting the officer. It'll be coming for him. The sun had barely started setting over the quiet, upscale neighborhood when Zaylen Carter stepped onto the pavement, his phone in hand, glancing at the GPS. His sneakers barely made a sound as he walked past the well-manicured lawns. He wasn't lost. This was his home. But to one man watching from a squad car parked at the end of the cul-de-sac, he didn't belong. The police cruiser's sirens whooped once, sharp and commanding. The car screeched to a stop just feet away from Zaylen, and before he could react, Officer Brad Keller threw open the door, stepping out like a predator locking onto prey. "Hey! Hands where I can see them!" Keller barked. Zaylen, startled, turned, lifting his hand slightly. "What? I live—" Smack. The slap landed so hard that it echoed in the empty street. Zaylen staggered, his vision flashing white. His phone slipped from his fingers, crashing onto the pavement, the screen shattering on impact. Pain seared through his cheek. His breath caught in his throat. Did that just happen? Keller grabbed him roughly, shoving him against the hood of the police car. "You think you can just stroll through here like you own the place?" His voice was filled with nothing but pure, smug authority. I do live here," Zaylen gasped. Keller chuckled, tightening his grip. "Oh yeah? And I'm the damn president." A few distant neighbors paused on their porches, watching, but no one moved. No one dared. Keller reached for his radio. He was calling this in as a trespasser. Zaylen tried to turn his head, to plead with someone, anyone, to speak up. And then, a car pulled up, sleek, black, official. The door swung open, and a tall black woman in an elegant navy blue suit stepped out. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she strode forward, her eyes widening in absolute horror. "Get your hands off my son." Keller froze. The color drained from his face, because this wasn't just some black kid. This was Zaylen Carter, the mayor's son, and now the entire world was about to find out. For a long, suffocating moment, no one moved. Zaylen still felt the sting on his cheek, his breath coming in shaky gasps. His mother, Mayor Evelyn Carter, stood just feet away, her sharp brown eyes locked onto Officer Brad Keller, who hadn't yet let go of her son. "I said," she repeated, her voice like ice, "get your hands off my son." Keller's grip loosened, but he didn't let go immediately. He hesitated, as if still trying to calculate whether his usual arrogance could save him. The realization hit him in slow motion. This wasn't just any black family. This was power. He yanked his hands away like he had just touched a hot stove. "Madam Mayor," he stammered, his bravado crumbling. Zaylen stumbled back, his chest heaving as his mother rushed to him. She cupped his face, her fingers gently brushing over the forming bruise. Rage flashed in her eyes. "What did he do?" she demanded. Keller straightened his stance, clinging to authority like a lifeline. "He was trespassing. Lives. Here." Silence. Keller's mouth opened, then closed. His sweaty fingers hovered near his belt, as if contemplating another move. The neighbors who had been watching were no longer pretending not to see. Phones were out, cameras rolling, and the unmistakable sound of footsteps rushing closer. More squad cars arriving. Evelyn turned to her driver. "Get Zaylen inside." Zaylen wanted to protest, wanted to stay and see this through, but his mother's eyes weren't asking. They were commanding. As he walked toward his house, he heard his mother's voice ring out one last time. "This isn't over." The video of the slap hit the internet within the hour. By morning, it had gone viral. News outlets picked it up. The caption read, "Racist cop slaps black teen, not realizing he's the mayor's son." Zaylen woke up to his phone buzzing non-stop. His name was everywhere. Messages flooded in. Some supportive, others filled with hate. "Figures," one comment read. "Rich black kid learns what real black people go through every day." Others were worse. Racist threats. Vile words. But the worst part? Keller wasn't fired. Not yet. In fact, he doubled down. "That boy was acting suspicious," Keller told a local news station. "I followed my training." Then came the official police statement. The officer acted within protocol. There is no evidence of excessive force. Zaylen clenched his fists as he watched the press conference on TV. His mother stood at the podium in City Hall, her expression controlled, but furious. "This is not about my son," she said, her voice unwavering. "This is about a system that protects men like Keller at the expense of justice, and I refuse to let this go." The police union responded immediately. "Mayor Carter is politicizing the situation," they claimed. "Officer Keller is an outstanding member of law enforcement, and we stand by him." Zaylen felt his stomach drop. They were circling the wagons. This was bigger than just one cop. Then the real bombshell dropped. A young black journalist, Malik Spencer, had been digging into Keller's record. And what he found? Terrifying. Keller had over 30 complaints filed against him. A black teen falsely arrested in 2018. A Latino father beaten during a traffic stop. A white rookie cop who tried to report Keller, only to be forced out of the department. And yet, Keller was still on duty, still wearing a badge, still untouchable. Until now. Zaylen's mother was not going to back down, and neither was he. For the first time in his life, he realized the truth. His privilege hadn't protected him. His name hadn't saved him. The system wasn't broken. It was built this way, and now it was time to burn it down. Zaylen sat on the edge of his bed, phone in hand, scrolling through the firestorm of reactions. His name was on every news outlet, every social media platform. Some people were furious, demanding Keller be fired and arrested. Others, they were making excuses. Why was he out so late? He looked suspicious. The cop was just doing his job. Here we go again, playing the race card. Zaylen's jaw tightened. Somehow, even with video proof, people still refused to see the truth. His mother had been in politics long enough to know how this would go. She sat across from him in their living room, flipping through a thick folder of reports. Keller should be off the streets by now, Zaylen muttered. Mayor Carter sighed, rubbing her temples. They're stalling. The police union is protecting him. Zaylen clenched his fists. If that video wasn't enough, then what is? His mother set the folder down. The truth isn't enough for people who don't want to hear it. We need something bigger. That's when her phone rang. A deep voice crackled over the line. Malik Spencer, the journalist, sounded tense. "I found something," he said, "but it's bad." He wasn't talking about Keller's old complaints. Those were damning, but not enough to bring him down. This was different. Keller wasn't alone, Malik continued. There's a whole group of them, officers who cover for each other, and they don't just rough people up. Zaylen's stomach dropped. "They've buried evidence," Malik said, "and I think they've killed before." His mother froze. "What?" "There's a case from 2 years ago. A black man, Michael Reeves, died in custody. Official cause of death, overdose." Malik's voice darkened. But an officer leaked the real report. The guy was beaten so bad, he had internal bleeding. And guess who was one of the arresting officers? Keller. Zaylen felt his pulse in his ears. "This isn't just about me," he whispered. "No," his mother said, her voice tight. "It's bigger than that, and if we don't move fast, they'll cover it up again." Meanwhile, Keller wasn't backing down. He went on a conservative talk show, painting himself as the real victim. "That kid was disrespectful. I feared for my life. Now my family's getting threats, all because people want to play the race card." The host nodded sympathetically. "This is a witch hunt," she agreed. "The mayor is using this to push her own agenda." Zaylen slammed his phone down. "He's playing the victim?" he snapped. "He's acting like he's the one in danger?" His mother sighed, setting down the folder. "Of course he is. It's the oldest trick in the book." But Zaylen wasn't just angry. He was done. "We need to hit back harder," he said. "We need to expose him." His mother gave him a careful look. "Zaylen, number. I'm not just going to sit here while he controls the story." His mother's lips pressed together. Then, finally, she nodded. "All right, let's show them the truth." The next morning, Zaylen and Malik leaked the Michael Reeves case. They released the autopsy, the photos, the false overdose report. Twitter exploded. This cop didn't just slap a kid. He's covered up murder. How many more has he hurt? Why is he still on the force? Then, another shockwave. A former officer came forward. On national TV, he admitted what everyone feared. There's a culture of silence. We knew what Keller was doing, but speaking out meant losing your job, or worse. The pressure was building. Now the department was forced to act. Keller was finally suspended. But that wasn't enough. Not for Zaylen. This wasn't just about getting him off the force. It was about bringing him down for good. And this fight was just getting started. Zaylen couldn't sleep. Even with Keller suspended, it wasn't enough. He knew how this worked. Cops like Keller didn't go to jail. They got quietly reassigned, let the public outrage die down, then slipped back into the system. Untouchable. Not this time. He sat in his dimly lit bedroom, scrolling through the files Malik had sent him. Dozens of complaints, cases quietly dismissed, Black and Latino men arrested, brutalized, and silenced. It made him sick. And then, he saw it. A name buried in the records. One he recognized. Officer Sean Grady. Zaylen's stomach twisted. Grady wasn't just another dirty cop. He was Keller's partner. And more importantly, he was still on the force. Zaylen bolted up, dialing Malik. "Grady," Zaylen said the moment he picked up. "He's the key." Malik exhaled. "I was hoping you'd catch that." Turns out Grady had a history just as bad as Keller's. But he had one crucial difference. He was careful. He never used excessive force when his body cam was on, never got caught on video. But he was always there, always covering for Keller. Then came the biggest bombshell of all. 2 years ago, Michael Reeves, the man who died in Keller's custody, had filed a formal complaint against Grady. A week later, Reeves was dead. Zaylen's hands trembled as he read the report. This wasn't negligence. It was murder. And it had been buried. By Grady. By Keller. By the entire department. "This is it," Zaylen said, his voice shaking with adrenaline. "This proves everything." Malik hesitated. "This also makes it dangerous." Zaylen swallowed hard. He wasn't stupid. These men were dangerous. But that didn't change what needed to be done. "No more waiting," Zaylen said. "We take this public." His mother walked into the room at that moment, overhearing the last part. She frowned. "Take what public?" Zaylen turned the screen toward her. The real story. Her eyes skimmed the files. Her expression didn't change, but the shift in her posture said everything. "This," she whispered. "This could take them all down." "Then let's do it," Zaylen said. For the first time, his mother didn't tell him to step back. She simply nodded. And in that moment, Zaylen knew the war was about to begin. The next day, Mayor Carter stood before the press. "This is no longer just about my son," she said firmly. "This is about corruption at the highest level." She held up a folder thick with evidence. "I am calling for a full investigation into the officers involved in the death of Michael Reeves, including former officer Brad Keller and his partner, Sean Grady." The crowd exploded with questions. But before anyone could react further, the police union struck back. A statement was released within the hour. "The mayor is engaging in a political witch hunt. She is smearing good officers to push her own agenda. We will not stand for these baseless accusations." Then, the real gut punch. Grady himself went on live TV. "I had nothing to do with what happened to Michael Reeves. The mayor is lying to cover for her son's behavior. This is an attack on law enforcement." The strategy was clear. They weren't just defending Keller. They were making Zaylen and his mother the villains. Zaylen stared at the TV screen in disbelief. They were losing control of the narrative. "This is bad," Malik muttered over the phone. "They're trying to turn the public against you." Zaylen exhaled, running a hand down his face. "Then we hit back harder." His mother looked at him. "How?" Zaylen's gaze was steely, unshaken. "We don't just tell the truth," he said. "We show them." And in that moment, a plan began to form, one that would bring the entire system crashing down. Zaylen knew that talking wouldn't be enough. The police union was twisting the story. People were starting to doubt. The same tired arguments flooded social media. Where's the proof Keller did anything worse than a slap? Why drag another officer into this? This is just political theater. Zaylen clenched his fists. They needed more than accusations. They needed undeniable proof. And he had an idea where to find it. That night, Zaylen sat in front of his laptop. Malik was on a video call, nervous but determined. "The police system is locked down tight," Malik said. "But there's one weakness. Officers use the same internal portal for their reports. If we can get into Grady's account—" Zaylen leaned forward. "We can find what they buried." Malik took a deep breath. "This is illegal, you know." Zaylen's jaw tightened. "And what they did wasn't." A long silence. Then Malik nodded. "All right, let's do it." It took hours. The system was tough to crack. But then, a breakthrough. A hidden folder. Password protected. Labeled Inactive Investigations. Zaylen's pulse raced. When Malik finally bypassed the encryption, they saw what they'd been looking for. The original report on Michael Reeves's death, before it was altered. Crime scene photos showing fresh bruises, ones the coroner's report never mentioned. A signed statement from an officer who claimed Reeves was still alive when Keller and Grady brought him in. Zaylen's breath hitched. They killed him, and they covered it up. But that wasn't all. At the bottom of the folder was a single video file. Zaylen hesitated, then clicked play. What they saw next changed everything. The footage was grainy. A security cam from the police station's intake area. It showed Michael Reeves being dragged inside, barely conscious. Keller and Grady laughing. Then, a brutal hit to Reeves's stomach. A kick. A punch. And then, Reeves stopped moving. A third officer stepped in, looking nervous. "He needs a hospital." Keller shoved him back. "He'll be fine." The video cut out. Zaylen sat there, frozen. His mother stood behind him, watching over his shoulder. She covered her mouth. Oh my God. They had everything. Zaylen didn't wait. Within minutes, the video was uploaded. Within an hour, it was everywhere. The reaction, nuclear. This is what they covered up. Keller and Grady need to be in prison. How many other bodies are they hiding? The city erupted. Protesters flooded the streets. National news picked up the story. Even the police department couldn't ignore it now. The takedown begins. Grady was immediately placed on leave. The state attorney announced a criminal investigation. The Justice Department stepped in. And Keller? He disappeared. When officers went to arrest him, his house was empty. He was on the run. And now? It wasn't just about justice. It was about hunting a fugitive. And Zaylen? He wasn't done yet. Zaylen sat in the back of an unmarked SUV, his heart pounding like a war drum. The city had exploded into chaos, protests, outrage, non-stop media coverage. And now, Keller was a fugitive. He had run the moment the charges dropped, but he couldn't run forever. Malik's voice crackled through the phone. "We got a tip. Keller's hiding at a cabin outside the city, his brother's place." Zaylen exchanged a look with his mother. "You know what this means, right?" Mayor Carter said. Zaylen nodded. If Keller was caught alive, he'd talk. And if he talked, he'd take down everyone who had protected him. That meant one thing. Dirty cops might try to take him out before he could testify. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was a race. Breaking news. Former officer Brad Keller on the run. The city was on edge. The police weren't just looking for Keller anymore. The FBI was involved. Zaylen, Malik, and Mayor Carter watched the news unfold from City Hall. The tension was suffocating. Then, another tip. "Keller's trying to get out of state," Malik said, phone pressed to his ear. "But someone's helping him." Zaylen's chest tightened. "Who?" Malik's eyes darkened. "Sean Grady." That night, Zaylen and his mother were rushed to a secure location. But Zaylen couldn't sit still. He felt it in his gut. This was going to end tonight. Then, a sudden police raid. Cops swarmed a small gas station outside the city. A black SUV sat near the pumps. Keller. Armed officers surrounded the vehicle. Flashlights flashed against the dark windows. "Come out with your hands up." No movement. Then, bam. The car revved, tires screeching. A chase erupted. Keller sped down the dark highway, but he wasn't alone. A second car was behind him. Grady. A police barricade appeared ahead. Keller's car swerved, spinning out. Grady, trying to escape, slammed into a ditch. Officers rushed in, guns drawn. "Keller! Grady! Put your hands where we can see them." Keller stumbled out first, wild-eyed, sweating. But Grady, he wasn't giving up. He reached for something. A gun. Bang! A single shot rang through the night. And just like that, Sean Grady collapsed. Keller dropped to his knees, hands in the air. It was over. Hours later, Zaylen watched as the news played on the screen. Breaking! Brad Keller in custody. Officer Sean Grady dead. It didn't feel real. But then, he saw Keller in handcuffs. The same man who had smirked at him, who thought he was untouchable. Now, he was just another criminal. And this time, the system wouldn't protect him. Zaylen stood outside the courthouse, staring at the towering stone building. This was it. The trial of Brad Keller had begun. Inside, the world watched. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, activists, people who had waited years to see justice. The families of Keller's past victims sat in the rows behind Zaylen and his mother, their eyes filled with quiet rage. And at the defense table, Keller. His orange jumpsuit clashed with his pale, sweaty face. The arrogance was gone. The smirk that once dripped with power vanished. For the first time, Keller looked like what he always was, a coward. Zaylen sat in the witness box, microphone in front of him. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed black woman named Monica Reese, nodded toward him. Tell the jury what happened that night. Zaylen exhaled slowly. He had practiced this 100 times, but nothing prepared him for the weight of speaking the truth. He turned to face the jury, looked them straight in the eyes. I wasn't trespassing, he said. His voice didn't shake. Not anymore. I was walking home, and Brad Keller didn't see a kid. He saw a threat, a problem, something to be dealt with. He leaned forward. And I want you to ask yourselves, if I wasn't the mayor's son, would we even be here today? Silence. The jury absorbed his words. Then Monica played the security footage. The slap, the way Keller mocked him, the laugh, the undeniable cruelty of it. And then, the final blow, the video of Michael Reeves. The gasps were deafening. The prosecutor turned to Keller. Officer Keller, do you still want to say you did nothing wrong? Keller swallowed hard. For the first time, he had no answer. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Zaylen sat between his mother and Malik, his heart slamming against his ribs. The judge looked over the courtroom, then at Keller. Brad Keller, on the charge of second-degree murder. How does the jury find? The air was so thick it could suffocate. The foreman stood. Guilty! A roar erupted. Zaylen's hands shook. He gripped his mother's arm as relief crashed through him like a tidal wave. Keller flinched at the words. His lawyer slumped in defeat. The judge continued. On the charge of obstruction of justice? Guilty. On the charge of excessive force? Guilty. The room exploded. Keller's face drained of color. For the first time, a bad cop wasn't walking free. He was going to prison. For life. That night, standing outside the courthouse, Zaylen looked up at the city skyline. The battle was over. But the war wasn't. His mother stood beside him, watching the flashing cameras and news vans. This won't fix everything, she said softly. Zaylen nodded. I know. Then he turned, looking at the reporters, at the activists, at the families still waiting for justice. But it's a start. You said. Zaylen stood at the steps of City Hall, staring at the massive crowd before him. Hundreds of people had gathered. Black, white, young, old. Some held signs. Others simply stood, their eyes filled with something he hadn't seen before. Hope. The cameras zoomed in on him as reporters jostled for space. Everyone wanted to know what came next. Zaylen stepped up to the podium. His voice was steady, but his words carried the weight of something bigger than himself. I never wanted to be here, he admitted. I never wanted to be a name in the headlines. But this fight, it wasn't just about me. He looked over the sea of faces. It was about every person who never got justice, about the ones whose names never made it to the news, the ones who were silenced, forgotten, buried. He exhaled, gripping the podium. They told us the system wasn't broken, that this was just how it worked. His eyes hardened. They were right. This is exactly how it was built to work. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Zaylen looked straight into the cameras. Which is why we're going to tear it down. The audience erupted in cheers. Mayor Carter, standing behind him, smiled for the first time in days. As the chants grew louder, justice for Michael, justice for all, Zaylen lifted his head. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. And this time, they weren't asking for justice. They were taking it.